and he will make a decision within the next 2 weeks.
Caroline.
Sure.
Thanks, Caroline.
Carolyn Levitt just told us that Donald Trump will make a decision on whether or not to attack Iran within 2 weeks. This basically gives Donald Trump this opening where she says negotiations are still ongoing to, within the next 2 weeks, decide to strike or not. It gives Donald Trump a lot of optionality. This is normal. This is kind of part of Donald Trump's chaos theory. Though she's immediately asked, hey, what about the fact that Donald Trump always extends his 2 weeks? And she's like, well, Donald Trump doesn't always extend his 2 weeks. Point is, doesn't look like the strikes are super imminent anymore. But we can obviously keep paying attention to the updates on what else is going on. And for now, it looks like the Iranian-Israeli strikes are just going to keep going back and forth.
I personally believe nothing short of America going in and watching the dismantling of Fordo would be something he would agree to. His agreement would be one that would ensure Iran does not get nuclear weapons.
We can't just make it the IAEA.
No, they're feckless, they're weak, they're the UN.
But do nothing. All right, we'll move on.
I mean, that's not entirely clear. There are some important updates that we got to talk about coming out of Israel, but it's not entirely clear that IAEA weapons inspectors are worthless and useless to the point where we should just start bombing countries that, you know, abide by IAEA inspections. The problem with Iran is that we used to have a joint comprehensive plan of action that Donald Trump tore up, and he was going to replace with a better, more aggressive plan with Iran. The issue was that at the time, a lot of people were frustrated that the restrictions on Iran's ability to enrich uranium weren't as restrictive. But then when Iran walked away from the JCPOA, guess what ended up happening? You ended up getting an Iran that, well, guess what? Ended up manufacturing more enriched uranium. We are concerned about highly enriched uranium, which obviously could potentially be used and further enriched into weapons grade highly refined U-235. This takes a lot of time through a centrifugal process and otherwise. So Donald Trump right now was lashing out a little bit this morning. I saw him lash out at the Wall Street Journal. The reason it looked like he was lashing out at the Wall Street Journal, along with, we got to talk about some of the other strikes that happened on Israel, including on the medical facility, which remarkable, by the way, that the surgery center that got hit was evacuated just 1 day prior, almost like they had some kind of sixth sense that a missile strike and a direct hit was coming, which is absolutely insane. But apparently, Iran was trying to hit the intelligence facilities close by. Didn't mean to hit the medical center, but they did. But see, the Wall Street Journal has this talk about Trump privately approving the attack plans for Iran, but withholding his final order. This is where, remember, we talked about how a strike was imminent from Donald Trump. This was because we were putting all of the pieces of the puzzle together, and leaks within White House suggested Donald Trump, he was down. He's like, let's go, let's strike him. Turns out, as he was, yes, let's do it, get all the planes in place, get the bombs in place, get everything ready, let's create a little bit of a media spectacle. Let's let some people know the plans are imminent to freak Iran out to get some negotiations and talks going. This is where Iran yesterday says, yeah, you know what, we'd be willing to meet. You know, we'll meet in Oman, which there was a rumor and potential evidence that there was a delegation that started negotiating yesterday in Oman. There was talk that maybe Iran would actually even come to the White House to negotiate a deal. But it's not a surprise to me that Donald Trump approved attack plans to attack Iran. We had already gleaned that. Holding off for a last-minute negotiation makes sense, though, because it's politically extremely unpopular to get into another war. Although, let's be clear, Trump is not going to brand this as a war, and I don't think his intention is to get involved in another war. Nobody believes that we're just going to have another, short Desert Storm, or a short Vietnam, or a short Afghanistan occupation, or a short Operation Iraqi Freedom. As you can see, we don't really have a reputation for short. We tend to have long and protracted. And so I think this is where Trump, his goal is really, hey, let's get a precision strike in, go do the deed that Israel can't, and just move on. Now, what's interesting is that this attack plan talk from the Wall Street Journal has Donald Trump freaking out on truth, and usually Trump gets the most aggressive when people are hitting a little bit too close to home, in my opinion. Like, I tend to see him lash out when people are kind of on the right track with what he's actually doing. So take a look at his Truth Social right here. The Wall Street Journal has no idea what my thoughts are concerning Iran. Well, the funny thing about this is both things could be true. It could be true that Donald Trump did privately approve attack plans. He didn't deny that. And it could also be true that the Wall Street Journal has no idea what Donald Trump's actual thoughts are. Keeping in mind that we're in an environment where these strikes not only are unpopular with Americans who believe it could drag us into a protracted war, but they also have a serious risk of failure. I don't want to suggest that the United States government isn't capable of doing a great job with these missiles, but let's be clear, the only way these laser-guided missiles are going to function really well, in my opinion, is if we actually have really precision GPS data, like a spy in the facility holding some kind of device, somehow beaming up, and I don't even know how they would do this, beaming up through 60 meters of concrete, the precise alignment of where they are compared to where the top is. Now, maybe that's unreasonable. Maybe all you have to do is sort of like, take a LiDAR camera or whatever and film from the entrance deep in and do like a 3D Matterport scan here of the facility. The problem is, it's still really tough to actually bunker bust these facilities, because if you're too low, you're screwed. If you're too high, you're screwed. These bunker busting bombs that are 30,000 pounds, it's really important to remember, they're not 30,000 pound warheads. They're like 5,000 pound warheads. And if they don't go deep enough, you're screwed. And if they end up too far, too low, you're also screwed. And obviously, if you miss, you're screwed, because the blast radius of this is maybe good for about 45 feet, 30 feet, something like that. So you got to have some really dang good positioning. This right here that they're showing on screen, by the way, is Natanz. This was easy, because look at Natanz. When you look at this Israeli footage from Natanz, it's pretty dang obvious where the facility is going to be. But when you look at the Fordo facility, it's a substantially harder target to hit. And I think that's what's giving Donald Trump some nervousness, because imagine the scenario that nobody's talking about. The scenario that potentially you end up striking the Fordo facility, your bombs don't work, and you just end up encouraging the Iranian regime and showing to the Iranians, hey, we kind of screwed up here, and we actually don't have any tools to attack your bunkers. That's one of the downside problems, because this is under a ridge. So which side do you drop the bomb from? Which angle do you use? Well, is it here? Is it here? Some of these tunnels, mind you, are also going to be dead ends, and they're designed to be at multiple different 90-degree angles, so that way you could purposefully limit a blast radius. This is a really big deal. So there's serious risks to Donald Trump going for this attack. Not only the fact that the B-2 bombers are very likely to have to refuel with 60,000 pounds of bombs. They're just going to have too much drag to be able to make it, in my opinion. It'd be much safer to ensure a round trip. This is not a one-way flight that you refuel. So where are you going to do that? You're going to do that over the Persian Gulf? Are people going to see this happening? It's all problematic. There's a risk with everything, and there's no guarantee that even if Donald Trump decided to strike, that our bombs would work. So that then creates a potential risk that Israel goes as far and says, okay, well, if our hospitals are going to get bombed now, and Iran is going to get, ridiculous here, where, now all of a sudden they're quote unquote missing our intelligence facilities and they're bombing our hospitals, then we're just going to end up using a strategic nuclear weapon against Fordo. And then guess what happens? Well, now you actually have a nuclear conflict, right? Here are just some photos yesterday of the medical facility that was hit. So there's a lot more to this than just, oh yeah, let's, bomb them in and out. I believe that it could be an in and out. But you better damn hope that that in and out is successful, because if we fail, there's just going to be more of this. And what Iran is purposefully doing right now is they're just trickling ballistic missiles, especially some of the hypersonics that can actually, sort of thrust themselves into different directions intentionally. This is actually a pretty impressive new style of hypersonic missile that Iran is using. You can dodge some of the Israeli interceptors. See if I can find a little clip of one of those. But in the meantime, it's really worth remembering these bunker busting bombs, this 30,000 pound bomb everybody's talking about, unproven yet that it could work and it assumes that our intelligence is nearly perfect. And so that does create a little bit of nervousness. Now, all of that said, these attacks on Israel and these sort of individual lobs that we're getting against Israel, in my opinion, we've mentioned this before, but I think that they're happening because you have an Iran that doesn't want a whole flotilla, so to speak, obviously using a naval term here, of weapon launchers out, because if you have a whole flotilla out, it's much easier to strike those weapon launchers, so you're getting substantially fewer. Now, this is normal, and it explains potentially why we're getting these sort of more one-off attacks against Israel, and some of the hypersonics are just able to actually get through the Israeli Arrow 2, David Sling, Arrow 3, and Iron Dome facility. Iron Dome, the localized one, isn't designed for these ballistic missiles either. But the problem also with Iran is they're not really good at targeting. Like, they're really good at getting ish close with the ones they get through, but then they accidentally hit the wrong buildings. And then, of course, when you hit medical facilities, again, thankfully, one was evacuated. There's talk of this particular one was evacuated. There's talk of about 3 deaths that occurred, which is still terrible, but way better than if it were fully occupied, right? Not that any deaths are good, but here you could see some footage of what it actually looks like when the strike occurs. This is the closest one I've seen. It's intense. You know, this is like a war zone, and you know, you're in a situation where this is unfortunately escalating rather than de-escalating, and it does make me nervous and really hopeful that we can get a deal. Now, you saw the Fox News ladies talk about, oh, the only thing Trump's going to go for is some kind of, as he says himself, unconditional surrender. So I actually agree with that regarding the nuclear program. Best case scenario here, not some kind of regime change, not trying to like kill the Ayatollah, not trying to create a religious war, not trying to create an occupation, but instead saying, hey, look, you guys are done with nuclear weapons. We are done with enriching uranium, no nuclear program at all, and let's lay all this out on the table and open up maybe your ability to export oil, but move on. Here's, by the way, footage, or rather, here's video. There's footage of this as well. Here's a picture of a bomb impact mark on the energy reactor in Iraq, apparently decommissioned or not currently active. But it does kind of show that some of these, targets are starting to get a little more close to the, hitting the Chernobyl-style level of attack. This is the Israeli depiction of what the reactor unit looks like. They say that it could be used to produce a nuclear bomb in the future, and that at the moment it was a non-active reactor, which is why they targeted it. It's unclear how they have exactly this intelligence, likely by buying out people on the ground or by having actual just Mossad agents on the ground. Here's footage of the actual strike, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. I mean, this is, I'm just going to try to freeze frame it. Yeah, here comes your projectile, and it's quite a remarkable strike with this infrared camera that we have here. So, but it does show the expanding of this. I mean, we're now on, 7th day here. Netanyahu says the matter of Iran's regime change or fall is a matter of the Iranian people. There's no substitute for this. Israel's Prime Minister Bibi says, change or fall of the Iranian regime is not a goal, but could be a result. This is in an interview apparently taking place literally as we're recording this. So it shows you that this isn't the goal of the international community to have regime change to the extent you believe Bibi. I believe this is true, though. You don't want a power vacuum in the region and ending up with the Taliban taking over or some Israeli occupation. That's really bad. What you want is just no enriching of uranium. And this is why Israel is really sort of leaning on Trump. Hey, can you help us finish the job here? And the idea, too, is that if we do finish the job in Fordo, that we end up in a situation where we say, all right, Iran folds, and we end up in just a place of peace again. Of course, restoring peace to the Middle East is a goal, It's not something that is very common, but it would be a very nice goal. Now, going back briefly to the Wall Street Journal, just to look at some cover on the Journal, and then Al Jazeera, we could get a little bit more color on some of the latest updates. I do like watching and listening to parts of Al Jazeera because you get the different perspective, the sort of non-American, less Israeli perspective, and you get a little bit more of a Middle East, Iranian perspective, a little bit more, right? So the live updates here are always a great tool that you can use to follow with Iran attacks failing to diminish Israelis' public support for the war. I think it's worth knowing that the Israelis do believe that if nuclear weapons get in the hands of Hamas or the Houthis or Hezbollah, a strategic nuclear weapon will be deployed on Israel. And I think there is truly real fear here. And so there's this accepting almost of this is what we've lived with for decades. And yes, the strikes at the moment may be worse, and some of them we're getting through, which isn't great, especially with those trajectory-changing ballistic missiles, some of which Iran apparently has. It makes it a little harder to intercept. Just so you quickly know, ballistic missiles, you're launched, you're fueled up to a certain point, and then you just fall in an arc, which actually makes them relatively predictable because they're just falling to the ground. However, some hypersonic ballistic missiles can actually have little thrusters on the edges of them. So after you get thrust up with your boosters, you're out of your booster fuel, and you're in the arc phase. As you're in this sort of arc phase, the trajectory by interceptors can be calculated, but they are now adding technology where you could have little thrusters that but purposefully create new arcs just to throw off the interceptor technology, which is frustrating, obviously, to the Israelis, and maybe one of the reasons we're seeing some more of these strikes actually land. Iran's foreign minister is appealing to the UK, France, and Germany to help stop the fighting. The idea here really is, at the same time as Khamenei is suggesting we are not going to surrender, the actual government delegations want to see peace. I don't think really Palestinians want to see more death. I don't think Iranians want to see more death. I don't think that Israelis want to see more death. I think what's most important is an end to essentially this nuclear enrichment program. That's it. That's at least the cover for this. Now, we had that same sort of talk in Desert Storm, although Desert Storm may have been in part because Iraq didn't really want to pay their Kuwaiti debt. But it's worth remembering that there was so much talk about Saddam Hussein potentially working up a nuclear weapon. One of the reasons they probably couldn't work up a nuclear weapon, because they did have the plans that they got from the Soviets and, frankly, the United States back in the 70s. They did have plans for nuclear weapons. Some of the reasons we maybe stopped some of the progress on these nuclear weapons was because of Desert Storm or Operation Iraqi Freedom. Now, maybe I'm taking too much of an optimistic line there, and I'm not like dying on that hill, right? I'm just saying there's a possibility that these strikes do set you back. We don't know where the Esfahan stored highly enriched uranium is that fits in about 15 cylinders that are marked by the IAEA. The Fox News girls are like, oh, do we trust the IAEA inspectors? Maybe, maybe not. But, they're some of the few people telling us, hey, we've got 15 canisters of highly enriched uranium. We were checking them out on a daily basis. We weren't seeing evidence that they were making a bomb. Sure, is it unusual that they're enriching this much uranium? Yes. Obviously, could that become a catalyst for making a bomb? Of course. But at least that's the IAEA point of view. But it does sort of align with what we're getting from Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, suggesting, I don't know, I'm not really, en route here on making a bomb. Of course, Donald Trump regularly has sided almost in any instance with Israel. It's unclear if this has to do with a Kushner connection, family relationship to Israel, or what, or just sort of that New York relation to Israel, or if it's just frankly that Donald Trump has some other intelligence. I personally think it is the one piece of negotiating leverage that Iran thinks that I think they have, is that, hey, we got all this stored uranium, you should consider lifting these sanctions against us, I don't know how close they actually are to a bomb. We're always told everybody's days away, but, we've heard that from Bibi for the last 30 years. However, You know, Fordo has been talked about now for the last like 4 days straight. I feel like the Iranians are pretty damn prepared for Fordo to get annihilated, to the point now where I'm like, is it even worth it anymore? Because, you know, potentially you could just move whatever you had there, if you even had anything there. Maybe you have another secret facility somewhere else. We don't know. So, and that's where I said earlier in this segment that, like, if we strike and miss, total embarrassment. So there's a lot to consider here when it comes to Iran. So that's my take. Anyway, hopefully that's insightful. And yeah, take it from there. So that's
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.